Second Timothy chapter 2. We've been looking at, the whole thought starts, I think, in verse 15 and runs, really, depending on how you look at it, I think it runs clear through verse 19. Well, okay. We've talked about two guys who have, Paul writes they've departed from the truth. They somehow, maybe it was philosophically or ideologically, maybe they were just trying to be creative and innovative. Now I have to be careful because I'm kind of boxing them in with 21st century kinds of things here. That's what I see often happening. But I don't know exactly. Paul doesn't say how did they get where they were, and where they were was having departed from the faith. That indicates Paul didn't just think, well, man, they really, really missed it. They messed up here with the resurrection. Well, his opinion was they had departed from the faith. Now that could mean, all right, they've departed from an item of faith or from even a foundational item of faith, which I believe the resurrection of God's people at the end, I think that's a fundamental piece of faith. Well, whatever. They say the resurrection has already taken place and they destroy the faith of some. This is happening in our current world. And I don't have an axe to grind on this, but as I look around, you might think, well, that's just young people who they haven't found their way in the world yet, and they're pushing back against the authoritarian values of their parents and the church they grew up in, and on you might go. And I think that is part of it. But there are other people, older people, who I don't put in that category of young and immature and forming their life values, who are deconstructing their faith in such a way that it results in them walking away, departing from their faith. They essentially deconvert. I'm grateful that it's not happening in mass numbers, but it concerns me that it happens at all. You see, one of the pieces of that is when you have questions, legitimate questions, even doubts, if you don't have a place where it's safe to explore those, if it's not acceptable to wonder about these things, to bring it up, to talk about it, to process it with other believers, I think you get what we get. The church, in my opinion, should be a safe place for those kind of discussions. Well, there's a whole bunch of factors, and I'm not going to bore you with my sociological theories, but I think, in my experience and opinion, today the church is broadly not such a safe place. It is often a retreat from the world where the people in authority and in charge in the church are in a full-on defend against mode. Okay, I'm way off the track. People are still having their faith destroyed by people who present an idea or series of ideas in such a way that when you have doubts, when you have questions, when you don't feel secure in your faith, I don't know how to say it. They're going to wander. And sometimes they don't just wander, they walk away. All right. But then Paul writes the other side of the coin in verse 19. Nevertheless, God's solid foundation stands firm, sealed with this inscription. The Lord knows those who are his, and everyone who confesses the name of the Lord must turn away from wickedness. The Lord, God's solid foundation stands firm. There are people who have worked very hard to educate themselves in such a way that they have a firm grip on the solid foundation that stands firm. What is God's solid foundation? Lots of people have their opinions on it. I'll tell you my opinion. God's solid foundation, in my opinion, is love. This is, according to John, in his first letter, this is the definitive characteristic and quality of God. God, he says, is love. Go back into the Old Testament. Well, I think the most succinct statement of what is God after from us, what's the big plan, it's in Deuteronomy 6. Jesus quoted it. He was asked by a teacher of the law, what is the greatest commandment? Which is a pretty good question. What's the most important? Boil everything away and what's left? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then he added to it, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. It's an old idea, but it's still valid. He didn't even say, trust the Lord your God. He didn't say, honor the Lord your God. He didn't say, obey the Lord your God. Now, I was brought up in a church environment, church world that would have said, they often appeared to rewrite that to say, obey the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Now, let's walk it back a little bit. Jesus points out that loving God is the most important thing. I would call that foundational. Okay? But he also says, if you love me, you will keep my commands. So that love is not just this ethereal, rainbows and unicorns and squirrels that sing and birds that talk. That's not what Jesus. Jesus set love in a perspective that said, if you love me, you will obey. So that it comes to this. Our love for God is of the kind that promotes and sustains living within his design. And I know that really it comes down to the biblical language is obey my commands. Love is the foundational truth. I think it's God's solid foundation, love. And it begins not with our love for him, but with his love for us. Again, the Apostle John writes, we love because he first loved us. Accepting, experiencing his love, knowing his love in our heart and in our mind, That's the foundational, fundamental, the single one biggest thing. Love the Lord. And love your neighbor as you love yourself. I could go a long, long time on that, but I think I've gone long enough. That God's solid foundation stands firm. He is not wavering. He's not looking at the world and going, whoa, I guess they've kind of transitioned to the point that that's no longer as big a deal. Now we've got to do some other things to... No. See, I said this before, but the nature of truth is that it is unchanging. If it's true truth, to borrow a phrase from Francis Schaeffer, if it is true truth, it's true for all people, in all places, in all times. Okay, that's God's solid foundation, and it stands firm, as though the implication is it can take it. The foundation is solid and firm enough that all comers, bring it. The truth can stand. Okay. And then he says it's sealed with this inscription. The Lord knows who are his. Okay, now Calvinists are going to say he knows. And as a matter of fact, not only does he know, but he has designated them before the beginning of time. He has chosen some and not others. This is not about choosing. This is about knowing. And now we're going to get into briefly some what I consider deep waters. And I don't know that I'm qualified to lead a bunch of people into deep waters. But let's think about this. God knows everything. There is nothing that he doesn't know. And a big piece of that has to do with the fact that he is not encompassed or bounded by time as we are. He dwells in eternity. I don't know how you want to think of that, as a big bubble or as, an endless universe, because eternity is infinite, but time is finite. And when we look at events, when we look at issues, we look at ourselves and the world around us. We view it from a finite position, because God's position is infinite. He already knows everything that did, is, and will happen. So it would take me a lot longer to unpack that, and I don't have the time. You probably don't have the interest. But I will say this. He knows those who are his. Well, of course he does. He knows everything. Does that mean that he caused those who are his to accept him? Did he choose these people without their will? Or did he know who would without somehow constraining their will? Okay, you already know my position is he knew. That's called foreknowledge. He knew before we did. Those who are his, he knows them. And here's the other piece of that. To know means, in this biblical language, a deep, intimate understanding. He knows us in the way I would say, I know my wife. It's not that, well, yeah, I've encountered her. I know her name. I know where she lives. And no, I won't go into the details, but I know her intimately. We are known by God in that way. I'm going to pause there and we'll pick it up next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.